club shooting. Combs was arraigned on charges of criminal possession of a handgun.
On December 27, 1999, the NYPD responded to an incident that occurred on West 43rd Street in Times Square. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, gunshots rang out in Manhattan's very own Club New York, leaving numerous innocent bystanders in dire need of medical attention. Authorities reached the scene of the crime and arrested 21-year-old Jamal Barrow, a young, up-and-coming rapper known professionally as Shine, who had just signed to Bad Boy Records only a few months prior. But the man who signed him was nowhere to be found. Despite arriving with Shine that night, Sean Puff Daddy Combs was attempting to flee the club in a brand new Lincoln Navigator, leaving Shine alone to be charged with 3 counts of attempted murder and criminal possession of a weapon. It was reported that Diddy's driver sped through 11 separate red lights that night, flying down 8th Avenue past 2 parked police cars before finally being pulled over. Officers were quick to find 2 9mm pistols inside the vehicle, prompting them to arraign all 4 passengers, which included Diddy's then-girlfriend, Jennifer Lopez. One former detective recalling how J-Lo's mother was yelling at her in Spanish over the phone by the time they arrived at the Manhattan South Police Precinct, telling the New York Post she was really mad at Jennifer. I heard her say, "I told you not to get involved with him."
An officer testified that everyone in the SUV was ordered to put their hands on the vehicle, but Lopez walked away, saying she was going home. As she was being detained, a gun was discovered in the vehicle. The officer quotes Lopez as saying, "It's not my gun."
After 60 witnesses, 126 court exhibits, and 25 years of retrospect, the actual events leading up to this infamous shootout remain tragically unclear, though most accounts say Diddy was arguing with a man named Scar, who, annoyed by Diddy's relentless flexing, threw a pile of money in the record executive's face as a sign of disrespect. One clubgoer by the name of Natania Rubin testified she heard Scar threaten to kill Shine shortly before she says she witnessed both Shine and Diddy pull out weapons and begin firing. Natania then felt what she described as a flaming hot sledgehammer shattering her face. She had been shot.
As I turned back to look at them, I watched them bow bow. Both of them fired, and the muzzle flash was like pshh, pshh. Shine's muzzle flash was a little higher. He was on the side closest to the bar. Puffy's muzzle flash was a little lower, and he was on the side closest to where I was, straight ahead from me. I watched them both fire their guns. I watched them.
Natania was just one of 3 victims that night, and while there were thankfully no casualties, there were still countless questions that needed to be answered. To what extent was everyone involved? Well, J-Lo was exonerated almost instantly. In fact, authorities cleared her of any wrongdoing after just 14 hours in the pen. She was never charged. Her boyfriend Diddy, on the other hand, was slapped with 4 weapons charges for the pistols found in his Navigator, and was even charged for attempted bribery when the driver testified Diddy offered him $50,000 to say the guns were his. Diddy even reportedly presented a $40,000 ring as collateral.
This afternoon, jurors asked for a transcript of a phone message Combs left Wardell Fenderson, once his driver, now the prosecution's star witness.
And I just want to make you feel like comfortable, you know what I'm saying? Make your family feel comfortable.
What exactly Combs meant by that is in dispute, but the prosecution claims the rapper offered Fenderson $50,000.
After a very tense and extremely public 6-month trial, however, Diddy was acquitted on all charges, while his protege Shine received a 10-year prison sentence, despite Natania, the victim, maintaining since day one it was Diddy who shot her in the face, not Shine, who she says only fired his gun at the ceiling. In a recent interview with News Nation, Natania reiterated, "I literally watched them all pull out the guns. I had a clear point of view. I mean, for God's sake, I got shot in my nose. I was facing them directly. I watched everything occur and have described it vehemently to all parties involved. Who better to tell you what happened than the person who got shot smack dab in between my eyes?" Natania is in fact so adamant that she's since offered to have the bullet fragments removed from her skull for ballistic evidence should the case ever be reopened. Ever since that life-altering verdict, Natania has insisted that Shine was the fall guy, a term literally used by Shine himself after leaving jail. As much as Shine has made an effort to grow and change as a person, distancing himself from his troubled past by becoming the leader of the Belize Democratic Party in recent years, yeah, his dad is the former Prime Minister of Belize, by the way, no big deal, Shine has recently opened up about his role in that fateful club shooting during an interview with Channel 5 believes. In reference to Netaniah's claims, Shine stated, "It opens wounds when you hear the victim saying that it was Diddy who shot her. Everyone knew all along that I was the fall guy. My political enemies and detractors try to make me into this criminal, but everyone knew that I was just a young kid that took the fall. Everyone knew that was the story. I'm just saying that I've maintained my innocence all this time." While he doesn't explicitly say he took the fall for Diddy, he does make sure to emphasize what Netaniah is telling us, saying, "I didn't get into who did what, but the victim is telling you who did what. Fragments were never removed, so there was never any forensic testing to say who it was, but the victims are vindicating me," clarifying once and for all that he's moved on and that he doesn't want to relive those tragic experiences. So why discuss any of this now? Well, it all stems from a recent lawsuit filed this February by producer and Diddy collaborator Lil Rod, who has come out with a laundry list of allegations against his former creative partner, which we will be exploring extensively throughout this video. But what I want to focus on first is what these court filings say about the 1999 incident. On page 25 of the 73-page lawsuit, it is stated that Diddy bragged to Lil Rod about getting away with shooting people, sharing that he was responsible for the shooting in the nightclub in New York City with rapper Shine, and that J-Lo carried the gun into the club for him and passed him the gun after he got into an altercation with another individual. Lil Rod's assertion that Diddy bragged about bribing witnesses and jurors in the criminal case concerning the 1999 shooting lines up perfectly with Netaniah's own recollection of events that she has never once deviated from.
Even the surgeon who did my surgery to take out part of the bullet fragments that was aspirating into my lungs and try to remove as many bullet fragments as possible testified in the criminal trial that while they were putting me under, I was screaming, "Puffy, pew pew me in the face."
But as mentioned, this is far from the only concerning allegation against Sean P. Diddy Combs. In fact, there are entire decades of those, with the most recent wave of lawsuits being the most shocking and disgusting of all. Which is why today we'll be going through all of these stories, presenting them as cohesively as possible here in this video. It's gonna be a long one, and I don't doubt it will get pretty dark. While Diddy has yet to be charged for anything connected to the recent flurry of allegations against him, I think it's important we know what exactly he's currently facing in order to get a better sense of who he is and where he may go from here. But in order for that to happen, we need to start a little further back. Diddy, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Puffy, whatever you want to call him, has existed in the cultural zeitgeist for a minute now. In fact, he's remained a prominent figure in American pop culture since the early 90s. But I want to venture back to when he was nothing more than a young boy from Mount Vernon. Born in Harlem in 1967, Sean Combs was raised by a single mother in New York following the murder of his father in the early 70s. He attended a Catholic boys' school throughout his adolescence before eventually enrolling at Washington, D.C.'s Howard University during the late 80s. Initially seeking a business degree, Diddy spent most of his time driving around in his convertible and throwing rowdy parties that one former student described as a once-in-a-lifetime type vibe to Rolling Stone. Not all of his former classmates look back on Diddy so fondly, though, with another former student telling the magazine she kept as far away as possible from the rapper after he allegedly caressed her back without consent and asked if she wanted to meet his friend, alluding to Diddy's creepier, volatile side by recalling how he flew off the handle when she confronted him for cutting her off in the cafeteria line, with yet another student describing how Diddy would persistently tap on the classroom window to get his girlfriend to ditch class. Noticing how she would tense up whenever Diddy appeared, the student told Rolling Stone he just had a weird control thing. I felt like she was fearful, though his stint at Howard wouldn't last long, ultimately dropping out to pursue a career in music before starting his sophomore year, never to return to the school again until 2014 when they gave him an honorary doctorate, which it turns out was a pretty controversial move even back then. Several students at the time expressed frustration over the fact Diddy was getting special treatment when he only spent about a year actually enrolled, which is fair. I don't really know what Diddy could have brought to a commencement speech for a school he never got close to graduating from, but none of that matters now because they've since revoked his honorary doctorate in the wake of, well, everything horrible that's come out against him.
The university also made the decision to return Combs' $1 million contribution and terminate a $1 million pledge agreement from the Sean Combs Foundation.
But that was all way before he became established in the music scene. The way Diddy first got his foot in the door was by becoming an intern at Uptown Records, one of the oldest hip-hop labels whose roster once included the likes of Mary J. Blige, Father MC, Heavy D and the Boys, and of course, the notorious B.I.G. Needless to say, this is where Diddy began forming some of his earliest friendships in the industry, gradually working his way up to talent director and eventually to vice president of the entire company. That is until a falling out with the CEO, Andre Harrell, modestly telling Oprah Winfrey years later that the reason Andre fired him was because there can't be two kings in one castle. I don't presume that was the exact reason he got fired, but that's what he tells people. Still, the connections he made through Uptown would ultimately serve him well in 1993 when he launched his own label, Bad Boy Entertainment, just weeks after leaving his old job, signing Biggie immediately, which ended up being a huge blow to Uptown after the massive success of Biggie's critically acclaimed debut album, Ready to Die, in 1994. Throughout the early to mid-90s, Diddy continued to build his reputation as a record executive and producer by working with esteemed artists such as Mariah Carey, Mace, TLC, Method Man, Aretha Franklin, and so many others, seeing his company generate over $100 million in record sales by 1997. But this was also the decade where Diddy's illustrious history of legal problems began to mount.
A year has passed since the CCNY tragedy, but people have not forgotten what happened, including the event's promoter, 22-year-old Sean Puffy Combs.
In fact, we can go all the way back to 1991, before the Bad Boy days, to find examples of Diddy's first controversies, which it feels like a disservice to even call them that because these are actual crimes, not so much controversies. Organizing and promoting a city college basketball event marked Diddy's first bad decision, as stated by Jason Swain, whose brother was unfortunately crushed to death during a tragic stampede that occurred that night. Dirk Swain was just one of 9 people who lost their lives in that school, not to mention the dozens of other patrons that were injured as a result of the event being massively overbooked. A 67-page report carried out by New York City Mayor David Dinkins concluded that despite having a capacity of 2,700 people, the gym filled up to over 5,000 people as a result of non-ticket holders being allowed inside. The report criticized those in charge of the event for making a litany of mistakes and neglecting their duties at every stage of planning, according to a New York Times article from 1992. While we don't know what specifically led up to the crowd crush that transpired, we do know that once attendees were barred from entering, the people who were left outside stormed the gates of the gym and rushed into the lobby. According to the report, the only open door at the bottom of the gym somehow became shut, creating a deadly steel barrier to the surging crowd as outlined by the Times. A nightmare that I can't even begin to imagine. One victim by the name of Sharice Miles recalled to the New York Post how we were just chest to chest for hours. At one point, there was this rush inside, and that's when you saw bodies dropping. People were getting trampled, it was chaos. But that was never much of a concern to Diddy. You know, the guy who organized the event, who Sharice says walked right past me after there was this big rush into the gym and didn't seem concerned about what was going on. He just wanted to get his stuff and get out of there. I never got the sense of remorse or accountability, just like, let me get my stuff and get out. What's interesting to me is that the mayor's report, which you can read for free on the Wayback Machine, describes Diddy's initial plans of arranging a celebrity basketball game featuring rap artists in order to raise concern over the AIDS crisis. He then promptly called up an associate by the name of Tara Jeter to hammer out the details with the school. A contract was drafted up, and Diddy didn't even really bother to read it, despite it pinning a lot of responsibility on him as the contractor of the event, requiring him to buy insurance, which of course he didn't do. While a lot of the report spends time criticizing the school and police department, 2 entire pages are dedicated to the failure of responsibility by Sean Combs, citing that as a known promoter of rap concerts and other functions, he is fully aware of the need for proper preparation and coordination of such events, particularly with regard to the need of adequate security. In this instance, Mr. Combs spent little time making the actual preparation for the game and delegated most, if not all, of the arrangements to those who claim to have no prior experience with such events. The report also acknowledges how Diddy promoted the hell out of this thing, plugging it repeatedly over the radio on Kiss FM and knowing that over 1,000 tickets had already been sold in advance. They were already at half capacity and Diddy was still trying to get as many people there as possible without even making adequate inadequate arrangements with security. According to the report, the security situation was an absolute mess, with hired personnel having little to no understanding of their designated roles. It also faults Diddy for, evidently, not communicating with the AIDS education outreach program despite listing the organization on flyers, assuring ticket holders that donations would be made to that organization. It was marketed as a charity basketball event after all, only the leader of the charity says they were never approached regarding any monetary donations. As outlined by the report, Diddy's assertion that the proceeds were being donated was in error, meaning nobody quite knows what happened to that $24,000 the event raised for charity. There were also a number of settlements that Diddy was required to pay. Throughout the 90s, Diddy paid about $600,000 collectively to the victims' families, or roughly $75,000 per death, settling the last suit in the year 2000, according to Rolling Stone. The New York Post emphasized the frustration of these families, who blamed Diddy for resisting accountability and never officially apologizing to them. Dirk Swain's mother, Barbara, telling the Daily News in 1998 that she didn't think he'd ever taken true accountability, though he did reference the tragedy in a song, rapping it to the City College deceased, may you rest in peace. To the families, I never meant to cause pain. I know the truth, but if you want, then I'll shoulder the blame. Mrs. Swain called these lyrics stupid, asking what is he saying? Is he saying he's not to blame? Adding, we're not saying the blame is all his, but not once did he step up to the plate and say, yes, I am responsible.
Then Combs has maintained a low profile in the press, which he feels has wrongly portrayed him.
I'm famous for like the kid in their minds who through the tragic City College, and that's kind of hard for me sometimes to live with.
I think you can see by now that the 90s were a pretty tumultuous period for Diddy. He wasn't just making headlines for his mismanagement of charity basketball events, he was also routinely getting into violent clashes with fellow industry executives, like the time he caught his first assault charge in 1999 following the accidental release of a Nas music video for the song Hate Me Now. Directed by Hype Williams, the infamous video featured controversial depictions of Diddy and Nas carrying large wooden crosses on their backs, being flogged by an angry mob before being pinned down and crucified on those crosses. This thing remained lost media for over 20 years until 2022, when a user named HipHopVCR posted the entire music video in full on Patreon. And sure enough, it literally shows nails being driven through Diddy and Nas's hands. Diddy, being raised in the Catholic Church, had a long talk with his priest shortly before the release of the video and decided he no longer wanted his crucifixion scene included. Only by the time he came to that decision, it was pretty late in the process, and Steve Stout, Nas's manager, was reluctant to make the change considering A, he had already sunk 14 grand into the scene, and B, the crucifixion was Diddy's idea in the first place. Either way, the uncut music video aired on national television April 15th, 1999. And according to XXL, it was only a matter of minutes before Diddy and his bodyguards burst into Steve's office to violently assault him, clubbing him over the head with a champagne bottle in front of 2 clients. As Steve recalled to the LA Times all the way back in 1999, one minute I'm in the middle of a meeting, and the next minute I'm down on the floor and Puffy and his guys are kicking and pounding me. One of them picks up a chair and throws it at me. Then Puffy throws my desk and they just walk out like nothing happened. My jaw and my head were all swollen. It was a traumatic experience, and in the middle of it, I didn't know exactly how to feel. I was upset, embarrassed, scared, angry. As far as I'm concerned, this was an attempt on my life. Also, telling the New York Post at the time, I'm scared of him, despite Steve standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 300 pounds, as the Post mentions. But I have to defend the record industry. It's the record industry versus Sean P. Diddy Combs, he added. Everybody is afraid of him. He has a dark history. Almost instantly, Diddy was arrested, criminally charged, and faced up to 7 years in prison until Steve had a change of heart and asked the DA's office to drop the charges once Diddy apologized. Issuing an apology is an otherwise rare move for Diddy, but I guess he would have done or said anything in this instance to avoid 7 years behind bars. And I gotta say, the fact that people like Steve were speaking publicly about the dangerous side of Sean Combs 25 years ago says a lot. His abusive past has always been one of the industry's worst kept secrets. In fact, in 2001, a Detroit talk show host folks by the name of Roger Mills filed a lawsuit that accused Diddy and his entourage of assault, false imprisonment, destruction of property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a civil conspiracy, according to a 23-year-old article from Billboard. This lawsuit was reportedly filed around 2 years after Diddy and Roger filmed an interview in which the latter asked Diddy to comment on speculation that he had something to do with the death of his longtime associate Biggie Smalls. Refusing to answer the question, Diddy ended the interview right there and demanded it never be aired, even offering to buy the videotape of that interview through someone else. But when Roger refused, he was attacked in the parking lot on the way back to his car. He claims Diddy's bodyguards prevented him from leaving before forcibly taking the videotape from him, breaking his camera in the process, and twisting his neck and shoulder in the assault. While Diddy was forced to appear in court, he testified that he didn't remember the incident. Despite Detroit police being able to confirm that an incident did in fact take place, the jury quickly ruled in favor of Diddy, which was not unlike another instance in 2004 when a judge overturned a civil judgment calling on Diddy to pay almost $500,000 to a limo driver who claims he was assaulted by security detail Diddy had hired to protect Mary J. Blige, despite the driver, Cedric Bobby Lemon, literally wearing the necessary credentials to allow him backstage. He claims the two bodyguards punched him in the head, kicked him in the back, and broke his right ankle for absolutely zero reason. I mean, he was allowed to be there. And by the way, even if he wasn't supposed to be there, a reaction this brutal and violent wouldn't have been justified anyway. Being unable to work as a limo driver as a result of his injuries, Lemon was stuck with a $14,000 medical bill that he hoped the lawsuit would take care of. And although it may have taken a while, it appears the two parties did eventually reach a settlement in 2006, the details of which have never been disclosed. But I definitely hope this guy got a pretty big payout, considering Diddy's net worth topped $200 million at the time, according to Fortune magazine. The same article notes he was paying $112K a month for his son Justin's child support. Clearly, Diddy is not unfamiliar with controversy. He was in the news for this kind of thing all the time in the 90s and 2000s. Take, for example, a bloody altercation at an Atlanta club in 1995, where Diddy's longtime bodyguard Anthony Wolf Jones was involved in an argument between bi-coastal hip-hop group members from Bad Boy Entertainment and Death Row Records, Suge Knight's infamous record label that went on to sign Tupac Shakur. According to a 2001 report from the Los Angeles Times, an off-duty Fulton County sheriff by the name of Chris Howard, who had been working security detail at the club that night, witnessed both groups in a heated argument that included Diddy and Suge. It got so bad that Howard had to step in and break it up. Things calmed down for a second, only for another flare-up to occur, this time between Wolf and a man by the name of Big Jake Robles, a close friend of Suge. Howard then ordered the two groups to leave the club, making sure to keep Suge's party inside as Diddy's entourage cleared out. As Howard recalled, "I told Suge, okay, the coast is clear, and we walked outside and he got into the limo. His partner was just about ready to get into the limo when all of a sudden Puffy's guys came around the corner and one of them had a gun. I chased the guy with the gun around the corner. He handed the gun off to another guy. It was a .45. By the time I got back out front, that's when the guy took a shot at Suge's partner. He shot him 2 or 3 times, alleging he then saw the shooter jump into a car with Diddy's associates. The police arrived 15 minutes later, but at that point, the shooter was nowhere to be found. No weapon was ever recovered, and the victim, Jake Robles, died in the hospital a few weeks later. According to the LA Times, one witness recalled seeing Diddy's bodyguard, Wolf, pull the trigger. But that never really went anywhere. As this article points out, Diddy and Wolf were both standing trial in Manhattan on gun and bribery charges pertaining to the 1999 Club New York incident at the time this whole thing was being investigated again, which kind of took precedence in the media. To this day, Suge Knight still blames Diddy for what happened to his right-hand man. It's also important to point out here just how popular Diddy was at the time of all these disputes. Following the tragic and mysterious murder of Biggie, Diddy's tribute single I'll Be Missing You topped charts around the world and debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, remaining in the #1 slot for 11 weeks, a record-breaking feat at the time. Diddy's mainstream celebrity status only continued to grow as his debut album, No Way Out, reached platinum status and sold 3.4 million physical copies in the United States alone. He earned a spot on the Forbes list and even clinched 2 Grammy wins in 1997, including Best Rap Album for No Way Out. His lifestyle was nothing short of lavish, kicking it with the likes of Martha Stewart and Donald Trump in the Hamptons. His sprawling empire of restaurants, magazines, and